I'm Nima Rajan. There were more than 7,100 new confirmed COVID-19 cases nationwide Sunday, bringing Canada's total reported case count since the pandemic began to over 1.23 million. The national death toll sits at 24,300. The hotspots continue to be Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec. Ontario logged over 3,700 new infections, and Alberta more than 1,700, with Quebec logging just over 1,000. Yukon reported no new cases Sunday, but Northwest Territories had one, and there were another 11 reported in Nunavut's current outbreak. The first waves of the pandemic devastated seniors, but new Health Canada data suggests the third wave is hitting people under the age of 60. That's due to high vaccination rates among seniors and more infectious variants of COVID-19. The number of people over 70 who died between March 26th and April 23rd fell more than 77% from peak levels of the second wave. But hospitalizations for Canadians in their 40s increased by 65%, and hospitalizations of people in their 20s and 30s rose 40%. More than 2 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine are set to start arriving in the country on a weekly basis. They will now be coming from Pfizer's plant in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but it's still not clear when the U.S. will free up doses of the in-demand Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, which is now being given to people 40 and older in several provinces. The Pfizer-BioNTech doses are the only shots scheduled for arrival in the next 7 days. The Port of Montreal has said it will take days to resume operations after the Senate passed legislation Friday forcing over 1,100 striking dock workers back on the job. Workers walked off the job last Monday to push for a new contract with the Maritime Employers Association to replace one that expired in December 2018. Michael Murray, with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, calls the back-to-work legislation an attack on the workers' constitutional right to strike. Some sexual assault victims who testified at parliamentary committees in recent months say they felt angered and in some cases re-victimized by their experience. Julie Lalonde, a sexual violence prevention educator, says she was disturbed by the way other women who were sharing deeply personal stories of sexual assault were continually cut off for time by MPs during their testimony. Questions are now being raised about whether Canada's lawmakers should be trained in how to take a more trauma-informed approach to their interactions with vulnerable witnesses. Public health experts are calling for urgent action after a scathing assessment of Ontario's long-term care sector. The call comes after Ontario's Long-Term Care Commission released a report on the province's pandemic response in long-term care homes where more than 4,000 virus-related deaths occurred. The blistering 322-page document says the sector is in desperate need of an overhaul, adding that the province was ill-prepared to face COVID-19 despite lessons it should have learned from SARS in 2003. Advocates are calling on the federal government to address anti-Black racism in the public service by implementing timely changes. The Public Service Alliance of Canada says anti-Black racism in the federal public service is widespread, and there are limited opportunities for career growth or advancement for Black employees. The Professional Institute of Public Service of Canada's Executive Vice President, Norma Domi, says she is the first Black executive in her institute's 100-year history. Well, because they're considered freelancers, the federal government has told interpreters that they don't qualify for sick pay. Members of the International Association of Conference Interpreters also recently learned that they won't get paid if they need to isolate or quarantine because of COVID-19. The interpreters say the government's policy is tone-deaf, and members are upset because they must work on Parliament Hill, putting them at risk of getting the virus. Well, it has been a challenging year for college and university students who are now facing the prospect of not being able to find a summer job. University of Calgary Students' Union President Frank Finley expects it will be a repeat of last summer when more than a third of Calgary students didn't find any work and worried about dropping out or being homeless. The Canadian Alliance of Student Associations is hearing the same message from students right across the country. Canadians appear to be seeing strange things as they scan the night skies in increasing numbers during the pandemic. That's led to a growing interest in astronomy and unusual calls to RCMP 911 dispatchers. Tracy Duval, acting operations manager in Red Deer, Alberta, says the province's dispatch centers received nearly 900,000 calls last year. Winnipeg-based ufology research released a survey in March that said unexplained sightings across Canada increased by 46% in 2020. All right, stay with us. After the break, we take a deeper look at the legal challenge the Canadian Constitution Foundation has filed against the federal government's quarantine hotel policy. An interview with Christine Van Geyn, Litigation Director for the CCF and the host of Canadian Justice coming up. That and, of course, more news from around the world. So stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back on the Forum Daily. The Canadian Constitution Foundation is pushing on with its legal challenge to the federal government's quarantine hotel policy. The organization has filed an application with Ontario's Supreme Court of Justice, along with 5 other individuals advocating for an end to the policy. Currently, travelers are expected to pay to quarantine in government-approved hotels, which can cost hundreds of dollars per night. People can only leave if the COVID test they are mandated to take at their point of entry comes back negative. The CCF argues that these laws are overboard, arbitrary, and grossly disproportionate. To talk more on this legal challenge, we are joined by Christine Van Geyn, Litigation Director for the CCF and the host of Canadian Justice. Welcome back to Forum Daily, Christine.
Thanks for having me on, Nima.
So let's start with this. Can you tell our viewers about this particular legal challenge by CCF and how it came to be?
Yeah, so I was contacted by literally thousands of Canadian travelers who were overseas when this announcement was made. And what really caught my attention was the number of people who are traveling for what we call compassionate reasons. So they're not leaving for vacation. It might not be a good time to vacation. People have a right to do it. But these were people who were traveling because they needed to have a medical appointment for a type of procedure unavailable in Canada, or they needed to attend to a sick loved one overseas, or attend to end of life care, or to attend a funeral. These are all very compassionate reasons. They are so compassionate that the federal government actually created an exemption for travelers who are coming into Canada for a reason like that, a funeral, or to help someone who needs medical care, to get medical care yourself. But if you were leaving for one of those reasons, if you were leaving for a funeral, you could not get that same type of exemption when you came back. So the fact that the government had contemplated this sort of humanity for these travelers in one direction but not the other was very disturbing for us. We decided to launch this challenge along with 5 individuals who are all traveling for compassionate reasons to challenge this requirement, this policy, as unconstitutional. It violates the protection against arbitrary detention, which you have a constitutional right to be free from, and it impacts your constitutionally protected right to liberty as well.
Now, I want to touch on the safety of these hotels in particular. There was a sexual assault in one of these facilities, and now there's an investigation into a COVID-19 outbreak at another one of these facilities in Toronto. So how does this speak towards the overall safety and regulation of these hotels?
I mean, the sexual assault was a terrible, terrible thing. The hotel where that had happened strangely had removed the deadbolts from the doors. The fact that there have been COVID outbreaks now at these facilities is no surprise to me. I've heard from so many travelers who are forced to stay in these facilities, and they tell me that they feel unsafe. They enter and the lobbies are filled with people. People aren't wearing masks. They don't know where people have come from, and they don't feel safe when they would. If they didn't have this requirement, these travelers would just get in their car by themselves and head home to an empty house to quarantine. So it's not surprising, in my view, that there was an outbreak. And one of the things that's so concerning about this is, if the government takes you into custody, if the government puts you in prison, they have an obligation, a constitutional obligation, to keep you safe, to make sure you are fed. We've heard from travelers who were not fed for nearly a day, for nearly 24 hours, to keep you free from being assaulted, to keep you free from this virus that they say the hotels are designed to prevent the spread. But it turns out the spread is happening within these facilities. So this just leads to an undermining of the public health rationale that the government's relying on to justify these hotels.
And you recently wrote in a commentary in the Toronto Sun, and you said that this legal challenge should actually matter to all Canadians. Can you tell us why?
I mean, our charter rights should matter to every Canadian. We have a charter right to enter Canada and to be free from arbitrary detention. We have a charter right to liberty. When the government unjustifiably limits those rights, It doesn't matter if you're a traveler or not. It should matter to every single person that the government is willing to sweep aside the rights of some people.
All right, Christine, we've got about 45 seconds left, but what are the next steps for this CCF challenge?
So we recently had an injunction heard. We were not granted the injunction, which is an exceptionally high standard. But the court in that case did rule that we have a reasonable case to be tried, that at that threshold level, there is an issue about whether or not constitutional rights are engaged. The next step is a full hearing on the merits, on the constitutional merits. It will be heard later this summer, and we've already filed our evidence.
All right, Christine, we'll be sure to follow this story, but thank you again for giving us your time on Forum Daily. Always great having you on.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. All right, top national headlines coming up after the break as a Nunavut health report sheds light on COVID-19 transmission in the province. That and more national news coming up on the Forum Daily. Stay with us. A report from Nunavut's health department says shared cigarettes, broken isolation rules, and a lack of awareness at the territory's isolation hubs could have helped COVID-19 enter the territory. The territory's first cases were people who completed a 14-day mandatory isolation period in Winnipeg hotels, paid for by the Nunavut government. The Nunavut government hasn't returned a request for comment on the report, but now has voluntary COVID-19 testing in all of its isolation hotels. British Columbia's Liberal finance critic is self-isolating after he was infected with COVID-19. Peace River South MLA Mike Bernier says he and his family have tested positive, which he admits came as a shock since they have all been following public health guidelines. Mr. Bernier says the BC Centre for Disease Control has told him he was exposed before he was vaccinated the week of April 26th. A trial will begin today in Edmonton for an Alberta pastor accused of not following public health orders meant to curb the spread of COVID-19. Pastor James Coates of Grace Life Church spent a month in jail for violating a bail condition not to hold church services that ignored restrictions on capacity limits, physical distancing, and masking. He was released March 22nd after pleading guilty and was fined $1,500. The pastor and church still face a charge of violating Alberta's Public Health Act for holding further services despite the charges. The church was shut down and fenced off by health officers in early April. Alberta's MLAs won't be returning to the legislature for 2 weeks due to the province's record-breaking COVID-19 caseloads. Government House Leader Jason Nixon explains the government has determined that having members return to Edmonton after constituency week is no longer prudent. Opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley accuses Premier Jason Kenney of abandoning his post. Mr. Kenney's cabinet will continue to meet virtually, and legislator committees will also continue with members participating remotely. Some people hoping to get COVID-19 vaccines at drive-through clinics in Saskatchewan faced long waits over the weekend. Regina's drive-through reopened yesterday for the first time since April 16th, and at the start of the day, the wait was over 6 hours. In Saskatoon, the peak wait time on Saturday was up to 7 hours, and the lineup stretched several kilometers. Age eligibility dropped to 40 years and older on Friday. Vaccines are also available to anyone 30 and older in northern Saskatchewan, as well as for various professions. The president of the Manitoba Funeral Service Association says there's a long list of families who have put off funerals as they wait for COVID-19 restrictions on the size of gatherings to lift. Kevin Sweeride says he worries some families may be left with unrecognized and unsupported grief. Karen Mwandor says when her mother, Olga, died in March 2020, her family didn't write a full obituary because they thought they would be able to hold a full memorial service soon. Manitoba's current COVID-19 restrictions limit funerals to a maximum of 10 guests. The province of Ontario will be further expanding COVID vaccine eligibility on Thursday when online bookings open up to residents 50 and older. Others captured in that expansion include people with high-risk health conditions, those who can't work from home, including teachers and school workers, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people not previously targeted in early phases of the immunization drive will also be included. Well, meanwhile, adults who live in Ontario COVID-19 hotspots will be eligible to book their vaccine appointments using the provincial system starting today, regardless of age. Residents of 114 specific postal codes designated as hotspots will be able to book online starting at 8 a.m. Those 18 and up in some hotspots had already been able to book vaccines, but not through the provincial portal. Quebec is loosening some public health restrictions today, with COVID-19 infections stabilizing and hospitalizations slowly dropping over the past couple of weeks. The province is allowing elementary school students in Quebec City to return to class today. As well, the nighttime curfew in Montreal and neighboring Laval is moving 90 minutes later to 9:30 p.m. All four Atlantic provinces reported new COVID-19 infections Sunday. Nova Scotia logged the most at 133, though it was 15 fewer than its record high of Saturday as the province begins its second week of shutdown this morning. Newfoundland and Labrador confirmed 7 new cases of COVID-19 and noted there are now 12 confirmed cases on a ship anchored in Conception Bay. 1 crew member is in hospital, while the rest of the infected remain on board. Prince Edward Island's lobster season is set to begin Tuesday morning. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans confirmed Sunday that the season in Area 26A will open at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. The exact time for the opening in Area 24 will be decided during a weather call later today. Top stories from around the world coming up after the break as India's COVID-19 surge continues to shake the country. Meanwhile, North Korea warns the U.S. after Joe Biden mentions the country in a recent speech to Congress. And German prosecutors bust a major child pornography site. That and more news from around the world coming up next on Forum Daily. So stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back. India recorded another 368,000 coronavirus cases today, including more than 3,400 deaths, as a catastrophic surge ripples through the country. Experts caution the official COVID-19 numbers from the world's second most populous country are likely a massive undercount. Meanwhile, an investigation has been ordered into the deaths of 24 COVID-19 patients at a government-run hospital in the southern state of Karnataka that reportedly had an oxygen shortage. North Korea has warned the United States will face a very grave situation and alleged that President Joe Biden made a big blunder in his recent speech by calling the North a security threat. Last week, Mr. Biden called North Korea and Iran's nuclear programs serious threats to America's security and world security, and said he'll work with allies to address those problems through diplomacy and stern deterrence. A senior foreign ministry official says North Korea will be compelled to respond with corresponding measures. As the U.S. faces a reckoning over its history of racism, some Native American tribal nations that once owned slaves are grappling with their own mistreatment of Black people. When Native American tribes were forced from their ancestral homelands in the southeastern United States to what is now Oklahoma, thousands of Black slaves owned by tribal members also were forced to make the journey. Nearly 200 years later, many of the thousands of descendants of those Black slaves, known as freedmen, are still fighting to be recognized by the tribes that once owned their ancestors. The Philippine government says it has protested Chinese harassment of Philippine Coast Guard vessels patrolling a disputed shoal. The Department of Foreign Affairs accused Chinese Coast Guard ships of harassing Philippine vessels patrolling and undertaking training exercises in the vicinity of Scarborough Shoal off the northwestern Philippines. Both countries claim the rich fishing area, which China effectively seized in 2012. The diplomatic protest is the latest of dozens made recently by Manila's Foreign Affairs Department. German prosecutors say they have busted one of the world's biggest international darknet platforms for child pornography, used by more than 400,000 registered members. Frankfurt prosecutors said in a statement Monday that 4 German suspects were arrested. 3 are said to be the administrators of the Boys Town platform. 1 is considered to be one of the platform's most active users. Prosecutors said the platform had been active since at least 2019, and users exchanged pornography showing children and toddlers, most of them boys from all over the world. Tech giant Baidu rolled out its paid driverless taxi service today, making it the first company to commercialize autonomous driving operations in China. Up to 10 Apollo robo-taxis are now operating in a 3 square kilometer area, picking up and dropping off passengers at 8 stops in western Beijing. Passengers order a robo-taxi using an app. It won't start to move until the passenger's identity is verified and it detects that they have fastened their seatbelts. Spacex has safely returned 4 astronauts from the International Space Station. It was the first U.S. crew splashdown in darkness since the Apollo 8 moonshot. The Dragon capsule parachuted into the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Panama City, Florida, just before 3 a.m. Sunday, ending the second astronaut flight for Elon Musk's company. It was an express trip home, lasting just about 6.5 hours. A narrow footbridge suspended across a river canyon that claims to be the world's longest pedestrian bridge has been officially inaugurated in northern Portugal. The Aroca Bridge offers a half-kilometer walk across its span. Its metal walkway is suspended from cables and wide enough for 2 people. Some 175 meters below, the Paeva River flows through a waterfall. Children under the age of 6 are not allowed on the Aroca Bridge, and all visits will be accompanied by guides. Italy's culture minister has announced a $22 million contract to build a retractable, lightweight stage inside the Coliseum in Rome. Dario Franceschini says it will restore the arena for combat for gladiatorial shows, original to the first-century amphitheater that was removed in the 1800s for archaeological digs on the subterranean levels. The new stage will let visitors stand in the center and view the Coliseum's vaulted walls as they would have been seen by gladiators in ancient Rome. The words of a Manitoba resident's great-great-uncle, who died in the First World War, are now gaining a following on social media. Kendra Mineri initially wanted to share letters that Cecile Mineri sent home with her family, but interest grew, so she kept on posting them. Cecile Mineri died in 1918 when he and his crew were hit by an artillery shell near Bois du Ver, France, and 6 died that day. The letter topics vary, but what stood out to Kendra was how happy they were despite the circumstances. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and be sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All right, thanks for joining us on the Forum Daily, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care.